So, what are we doing today? Today, we're going to be looking at solutions to ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 using a thing called the quadratic equation. It's a special equation that allows us to find solutions without having to do any factoring. How do we know we understand? Well, how do you know we'll understand? When you find your solutions, you'll have no solutions, one solution, or at most two solutions based on your quadratic equation. And the maximum number of solutions you have is all based on the fact that we have an x squared term in our calculation. The highest power tells us the total number of possible solutions you could have. Now, let's move on to the note for the day. The key concepts. So, we spent a lot of time practicing our factoring, right? Now, sometimes your equation can't be factored nicely. Now, let's distinguish between two concepts. This is called a quadratic equation. Now, a quadratic equation is tied into a concept called a parabola. And we'll look at that in the next lesson. The reason why ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 is called an equation because it is an equality. It is an equation. This equation here we call the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula allows us to create two possibilities. So for today, we're always talking about two possibilities. The formula creates two solutions by using a plus minus in the numerator. Now, when we go and do our calculations, we're going to correctly round our answers to 2 decimal places for our lesson. Now, sometimes you can leave your answer as an exact solution, at which point you leave your answers as fractions. Now, let's go to this problem here. These problems ask you to solve the quadratic equation, and we're going to round the answers to 2 decimal places. But in this case, I'm going to ask you to leave your solution, leave as fractions for now. So let's go and identify some key concepts for today. So anytime we start, all our equations look like this. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. All our equations look like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to identify. One, we go and identify a, b, and c from our equation. So a in this case is 3 for the first one, b equals -5, and c equals +2. Now we get to our brute force. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to stage 2 of our problem. So stage 1 was identify a, b, and c. A, B, and C. And now for stage 2, we start by writing the basic equation. x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now, you need to memorize this equation. This is easy marks, 2 marks on a test. The next stage is 3. We do our substitutions. So let's begin. Now, what I'd like you to know is you could take this equation and punch this right into your calculator, but it requires you to put brackets around the top half of the equation divided by the bracketed bottom part of our equation in order to get the appropriate calculations. But right now, we're going to go through the simplification. It dramatically reduces the complexity of the problem. So you'll see, for the minus 5, it turns into a plus 5, so I just put 5. And then we continue with plus minus, and then what I want you to do is this. I want you to calculate everything underneath the square root sign and give me the final answer. By punching in the calculator, you're going to get the following answer. The square root of 1. So everything under the square root sign, you pump in negative 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2. You get an answer, you put it under the root sign. And then we finish with the simplification of the bottom, which is 2 times 3, which is 6. So now our problem, because of the plus minus that we have started with in our equation, which is right here, it's going to cause our problem to split into 2 possibilities. One, where we have x equals 5 plus the square root of 1 divided by 6. Or, for our next solution, we have x is equal to 5 minus the square root of 1 divided by 6. By punching this into our calculator, we get 2 possibilities. We get x for the first one. If we simplify the top, we get x is equal to 5 plus 1 over 6. So that means x in the end is going to be 6 over 6, which means x is equal to 1. Now, if I told you to give me the exact answer, you could leave it as this, because 6 divided by 6 is a whole number. Now, for the next part, we'll do the same thing. So we get x is equal to 5 minus 1 over 6, which ends up being 4 over 6, which ends up being 3 over 2. As our final answer. Now, as a decimal, if we had used decimals, that would be 0.67. Now notice, if we use decimals and rounding to 2 decimal places, we would get 0.67. And this should be not 2 over 3. Should be 2 over 3. The next problem, we're going to follow the same method as before, except this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to try a different way. So the first way was the first way we always started off with was identifying A, B, and C. So let's do that. So A, because A is 1 because there's nothing on our x. B is equal to negative 6. And C is equal to positive 7. Now, the second way of doing this problem would be to you could just calculate the discriminant. Remember, the discriminant is this. If you ever see something underneath the square root, remember that thing under the square root sign? B squared minus 4ac. We call this the discriminant. Now, the second way of doing this would be to start by calculating the discriminant. Now, before, when you did your problems, if you just calculated everything underneath the square root sign and simplified, it's exactly the same, except this time what we've done is we've chunked the problem into two parts. So b squared, so we basically calculate b squared minus 4ac. We figure out what that is by substituting directly in. So we get negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 7, and that gives us an answer of 8. Third way to do our algorithm is this. You start by writing your equation like before. Start your equation, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now, you've already just calculated this. You've already calculated part of this already. So now all we're going to do is substitute directly into our equation. So now we get x equals, well, negative 6 plus or minus. Now remember, we actually took the time to actually calculate that before we came to our equation. And we'll just put in the square root of, well, 8. Because b squared minus 4ac, when we substituted in, was 8. And now we divide by 2 times 1. And now we'll simplify. So now our problem turns into this. X is equals positive 6 plus the square root of 8, all divided by 2. Now, just like before, we split our problem into two groups. Remember, it's plus or minus there. It's one where we have x is equal to 6 plus the square root of 8 divided by 2, or x is equal to 6 minus the square root of 8 divided by 2. Punching the top into the calculator for the first calculation here, you'll find that it doesn't come out to be a nice number. So just give me the decimal. So in this case, our decimal is going to be, well, 6 plus root 8 divided by 2. And remember, like I said, because we have a numerator that is an addition, put it in brackets and divide by 2. Now, what you'll get is x is equal to 4.4, or x is equal to 1.6 in this case. For your next class, for tonight and possibly the weekend, just work on these specific questions. Homework is page 16, number 1 to 2, A, C, and E. On Monday, when we get back to school, we will work on page 16, number 3 to 4, A, C, E, 5, 6, A, C, E, 10, A, C, E, 11, and 12. So you can use that to do work over the weekend or tonight and then work on it on Monday as well. So we're going to spend the time and make sure we understand this. Good luck, guys. Now, there is a third question that's on this sheet. I'll ask you to try it on your own. Answers for the third question will be 1.8 and 2.2. Try it out, see if you get it, The equation that you're working with is 3x squared plus x equals 12. We'll talk about that on Monday. Good luck.